This is Death or Prison, brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. We bring you stories of hope and encouragement.
Hello and welcome to the Death or Prison podcast, brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. I am Johnny Branham. To my left, Ms. Tara McCard, and to my right, my lovely wife, Mrs. Shantae Branham. This is a first. My wife is on the podcast panel, and we're going to continue a conversation that some of you might have seen the previous podcast where, Tara, you were interviewed by some of the probation office this morning. We want to get into a little bit more about how you grew up and some of the struggles that you experienced in life. Tell us a little bit more about your earlier childhood.
So I grew up right here in Orlando, Florida, kind of like from a Hotel California type town. Once you got in, you never really left. It's a town now that my family still live in. I choose not to go there because of the destruction that it caused and that I allow to create in my life. I grew up in a very volatile family. They fought mostly themselves, each other. You know, they weren't really fighting neighbors and stuff like that. So I've seen a lot of abuse, a lot of verbal abuse, physical, spiritual, mental went on. You know, nobody ever told me I was going to make it. You know, they didn't allow children around the table because of the adult things they were talking about. So I was pretty much pushed away from a young age into a back room. We didn't have iPads back then, right? Like I was just pushed to a back room to not be around the adults. And that was my life, being pushed away from a young age.
Approximately how old were you during this time?
Well, from what I can remember, it's 6, 7 years old till I started running away. At like 13, I think I ran away for the first time.
Where were your parents?
So I grew up in Taft, and my grandfather built us like a compound, if you would. It was also backed up to my uncle's house, my great uncle, my grandfather's brother. So the whole family was right there. And I was always being told what to do by everyone, right? So my mom was there, and my stepdad, who I thought was my dad at the time, I found out when I was 15 that my dad was my stepdad, right? And that was a big blow at 15. But so that was my everything, right? My grandmother was, she's the only one I seen go to work that actually like punched a clock. So that was the only like positive role model in my life. I've seen that woman get up, go to work, come home, clean the house on Saturday and Sunday, and that was, you know, her life. If I needed school clothes, my grandmother was the one that took me to buy them. All my school supplies, anything that I had. So when I was 12 or 13, they moved me from this little town that the only thing I knew was there to a place down, it's called Holapaw, but there was nothing out there. And I felt like I was ripped away from any stability that I had, right? Looking back on it now, I had go-karts, four-wheelers, horses, you know, like all of that stuff. But in the midst of it all, like now I'm out there with my stepdad beating my mother, and I'm the only one there to help her when I could, you know, with a little brother and sister that had, through no fault of their own, like they were too young. I was 7 years older than my sister, so that created me being the protector. It created me being the one that took all of the abuse as well. You know, like I can take it before they can type stuff. And I was already so rotten by then that they were saint childs, you know, like.
You had two younger siblings, excuse me.
Correct.
And at age 13, is that something that you just assumed? Is that something that you felt innate in you to take on that motherly protective role? How did that come about?
Well, I think I was a little older to understand that I didn't like what was happening to my mother, right? And I wanted to stop it, but I was also getting the brunt end of some abuse. I can look back on it now, like they just corrected me the wrong way with a little too much, you know, belt. Too much belt. I had a belt that if I couldn't find it, I was in a lot of trouble because I would hide it, you know. But I did a lot of self-destruction even back then, reaching out, I feel now, for the attention that they always push me away, right? So then now I'm getting this attention through negativity, but it was attention nonetheless, right? It was the only time they really talked to me was, come here, why did you do this in school? Come here, why did you? But then I had that interaction with them.
You mentioned there was a shock in your early life with the man that you grew up believing was your biological father, but then later found out during that span when you're going through the abuse that he was your stepfather. How did that make you feel?
Well, at first it made me feel like now he can't tell me nothing, right? Like, you're not my dad. And but a sense of belonging, like, who's my dad, you know? And my mom just kept telling me that she didn't know who he was. And then, so I'm on this search for my father, who I have no idea who he is, right? Like, nobody's telling me who he is. My mom never told me. I was a one-night stand, right? She didn't tell anyone because she wanted to keep me. I was hers. So today I can understand her reasoning behind it, but the pain that it brought to me gave me a lot of, like, self-hatred. Like, if she doesn't want them to know who I am, why? Why am I so unlovable that he can't know who I am, right? Like,
Were there any coping mechanisms during that time, during that 13, 14, 15 year, or even before that, if I'm going too far in your childhood?
really, like, church. I went to church to get out of my house, right? That was my escape. So I don't know if I had any coping mechanisms, but I had a whole lot of running. I could run away from here, away from there. At first, it wasn't running from home. It was, I had a good friend that her family was really big into the church, and I did Bible study with her and things like that. When the kids go off to the side. And I just remember not being able to wait for Sunday to go with them, right? Because it was my one day.
Did you have any accountability at all?
Like chores or anything?
Well, any accountability as far as adults in your life or people in your life to kind of steer you back to the right path?
I think my grandmother did the best she could, but no, not really a guiding force, not anything like, if you do this, this is going to happen, if you do that, that's going to happen. Always like, if you don't go to school, you're not going to get a good job, like stuff like that. But it was like, don't drink, as they got a bottle of vodka in their hand, right? Like, telling me what to do while they're doing it. Who's going to listen to that, right? Like,
The time when church became an escape for you, which is a good one. I mean, we call it escape, but I think it's even something even greater than that. How old were you during that time period that you were actively trying to get out of the house on Sundays and engaging in that relationship with a young lady?
between 10 and 13, somewhere around there. It was a short time, but it instilled in me that that God was available.
You mentioned earlier today, during your first interview with probation, parole, that there was some abuse.
Yeah.
When did that start?
Well, right about the same age, around 12, 13 years old, sexually abused by my uncle, the same one that's my grandfather's brother. I accepted it probably because early on I didn't feel a whole lot of love. So I didn't feel like I could probably tell anyone. And I didn't want to tell anyone as long as they would leave my aunt, my brother, and my sister alone, right? Like, just leave them alone and we're okay. So I continued to let it happen until he messed with one of my friends one night. And so I hooked the electric cord up to the toilet. My family's always, you always hear like, don't put the electric cord in the water, get away, like you're gonna get shocked, don't step in it. So I decided to cut the end of it off and stick it in the toilet and plug it in, right? Like, you're not gonna mess with me anymore. I ended up not letting that happen, but that's just how I was, like, stop messing with me, right? Like, it's not okay. It's not okay anymore. And it worked. And I'm finding out more that I'm a protector of others than I am of myself. So I'm working a lot in counseling with all of that. that and God.
How do you feel the abuse that you went through shaped you today?
Well, in my relationships today, I do not accept any kind of violent. It's kind of like if it's not working out, just leave, right? Like you don't have to hang on to stuff till it has claw marks in it. Like I've done enough of that, trying to keep the drugs in my life and not let that go. Shaped me as far as I'm more forgiving of my family, especially once I started doing more things to myself than they ever did to me. As far as like in the drug world, jumping in and out of cars, I said earlier, like rape and arrest was a part of my life, and that was just the acceptance I had of it, right? Like if I wanted to do my dope, I had to do those things, and that was just part of it.
How does forgiveness play a part in what you've been through?
Well, first I had to learn to forgive myself, right? Like I can write a whole list of people I forgive for the things that they've done to me, but then I forget that I'm the number one person I have to forgive. And that was pointed out to me, and it made total sense. Like I'm still beating myself up, yet it's okay that you've done it, right? Like,
When was it that you actually started? What was like the first time that you began with your drugs?
well, from a young age, I would like experiment with the bottle of vodka that they leave around, or their weed, or whatever, you know. But when I hit 18 as an adult and could make my own decisions, that's when I started smoking crack cocaine. That was like my first love, and there was nothing anybody could tell me about it. If you'd asked me back then, you know, if I was ever gonna stop, I was like, no, I'm gonna smoke crack the rest of my life. Like that's the only future I seen. And I was serious about that.
At any point in time that you were entering into the drug life, did you ever think that I'm going to get caught with drugs one day, I'm going to be incarcerated? Any of those things run through your mind?
No, I mean, when I first went to jail, there was a few tears, whatever. And then after that, I mean, I've been arrested.
And how old was the
45,
first time?
18.
18.
18 years old, 18, 19.
How are you affording this habit?
Prostitution.
When did the prostitution start?
As soon as I did the dope.
Who were you living with at this time when you were
I was
drugs?
pretty much just by myself. I didn't sleep much, so I didn't really have a lot of hotel rooms. The only time I really slept, as soon as they put the handcuffs on, I'd be passed out in the back of the cop car.
So you were living on the streets at this time?
Absolutely. From the moment I did it, I was on the streets.
And you said there was some prostitution, so was there like what they would call a pimp or anybody like that involved?
Well, I used to always say, like, I have two pimps, my pipe in my pocket, and that's like, I really couldn't see myself going out there doing that and giving my money to anyone else except for who I was getting my dope directly from. So I didn't get into that life, thank goodness, for my choices in that area. But I was beaten really bad back in August 2nd, 2002, like to the point they called my family and said, if you want to see your sister, if you want to tell your sister about it, you need to get up here. And I made it through that. And I went back out there again after that.
Was there any time that you thought, you know, I got to stop this. This is too much. I'm going to die out here on these streets?
Several times. Only to go back out there. Like, that's where I didn't care about myself enough to think that I could make it, right? Like I said, nobody's ever told me I could make it. So what I did was, H&I panel came into the jail for Narcotics Anonymous, and they told me that there was a different way. And they invited me to this meeting, and I went, and that's where I learned about a God of my understanding, right? Like, even if I didn't understand him, that I could still accept him in my life. And if I could see the things that he was doing in my life as God doing them and not luck, not my good looks, you know what I'm saying? Like, if I could just start seeing those blessings as they were, right? Like, just to get my foot in a door of a God that I've always been mad at. I've had a lot of anger Because how could you let this happen to your child, right? Like, if you love me, why? So with that came an open mind, right? Like, if I'm closed-minded, I'm not teachable. If I know everything, nobody can tell me anything. So I had to gain a little more love for me to go back and try it one more time. See, the dope killed me every day, but it wouldn't bury me, right? Like I've heard it say. And if it's not gonna kill me, then there's a reason I'm here, right? Like, I have a story to tell. So my story today is like, don't give up on yourself. When everyone around you tells you, why are you going back to detox? You're just gonna get high again, like, okay. Or this self-forgiveness comes in, like, just to keep trying. If God lets me stay here another day, then strive for one more day clean, right? Strive for one more day. The further removed I get from that life, the stronger my foundation gets, right? And I'm not perfect at it. I live in structured living. I live in a recovery home. I've lived in a couple recovery homes. My best one in Daytona, Hope House, was that's where my foundation started. That's where they guided me to just stay, stop running. That's where I listened to those people about God, about acceptance. Like, whether you believe it or not, believe that we believe it. Believe that it's working in our life, right? So I started doing that, and then I went to jail with that violation of probation. And so then I had to practice, because it's real easy to love God and follow God when things are going good, right? Like, but when you're locked up, where's that faith? Like, how do you practice that?
Well, you talked about God. How old were you when you had your encounter with him? And was it at a church service or anything like that while you were in the facility?
Mine didn't come with the aha moment, right? Like, it had to be instilled in me. It had to be pointed out to me. It had to be taught to me. Now I feel like I'm on a one-on-one conscious contact with God, right? Like, I can thank him for this today. And as long as I know that it's not me and my good luck, then I got a leg to stand on. So as long as I give him what he deserves. You know, he was there for me when I wasn't even calling on him. So imagine what he's gonna do when I am, right? Like,
That moment that you speak of, it was a pivotal point. But I want to kind of go back. If you can give a lifespan or a time frame, how long did that lifestyle last?
14 years.
14 years.
On the trail, Orange Blossom Trail, right here, not far. And then I moved in with my sister, and I was still dipping and dapping, but I wasn't like in and out of the cars and stuff. And then I started shooting heroin, and then I started doing meth, and then I caught some charges that were punishable by life. And
how old were you at that time?
38, 42.
42.
So yeah.
So just over 20 years had passed, 24 to be exact,
Yeah.
from the time that you had really decided to push out, move forward. Out of the house, you weren't looking back. And now you're facing these multiple life sentences. What transpired in that time period, and what were you thinking in that time?
Well, I have a little knowledge in the court system, so I knew that if I took it to trial and I lost, they could give me anywhere from a day to 100 years, right? And with my record, like, I didn't want to play with that. God saw fit that COVID hit, and they offered me 3 years probation, felony probation.
And that was for what? What were charges?
Burglary of a structure and armed burglary, because with a battery. It was snatched. I mean, not that anybody deserves beat up, but I feel like I had a right in doing what I was doing. Obviously, I didn't, right? I see it for what it is today. So it changed my life, though, right? Like, if I see God working in my life, it was then. Because I wanted to stay out of jail a little more than I wanted to get high.
How many times were you on probation, and are you on probation now?
I couldn't even tell you how many times I've taken probation to get out of jail. I'm not on probation currently. I was on a 3-year probation back in February of 2020, violated it, went to jail 3 months after I got on it, which is what I was saying earlier. They terminated that probation because I was doing everything I was supposed to do, right? Like, when somebody sees in you and they see you trying, God just kind of takes over and doesn't let them. So I wouldn't have been able to come here today. I would have had to ask probation, transfer, like all of that stuff.
And how has this transformed your life? Are you on a road to where this is not going to happen anymore? I'm going to try my best to not violate this probation. I'm going to stay on this straight and narrow path. Tell me about that.
So being in that halfway house in Daytona gave me a foundation. It helped me build a foundation to where, like, I don't want to lose what I've gained today, right? And I had to get a small reprieve of that. I had 16 months clean, and I decided to do what I wanted to do, and now I have 60 days clean again. But what I want to say to that is, like, the person with 5 years clean had 1 day clean, right? Like, to not give up, that if I don't die, I got one more chance, right? But with the stuff today, like, we die.
You mentioned, of course, crack, heroin. There are people that are watching right now who are trying to figure it out. Some of them are still addicted to drugs. Some of them are still going through those battles. What can you speak to specifically that you've seen that works and hasn't worked to overcome these addictions?
So what works for me, because that's all I can say, what works for me is staying consistent at the one thing I do, or at anything that I do. I like to give up a lot, right? Like, or when it's not new anymore, the shininess kind of wears off, and I want to switch things. But today, like, I know I have to live in structured living because that's when I do the best, right? Like, so to surrender to the fact that I don't make my own good decisions at all, right? And that sometimes, like, a program is where it's at. Like, I wish I would have just sometimes just went and let somebody took care of me for 6 months, 30 days, 90 days. So I didn't have those things of life, bills, rent, how am I going to work? How am I going to get to probation? How am I going to get to, like, when all of that could have just been, like, sitting at a table with somebody teaching me about my addiction and how it works.
Structured living. If someone doesn't know what that looks like on a regular basis, on a day-to-day basis, describe that to someone that may need that.
Prison, jail, or, I mean, They tell me what to do in jail. They tell me when to get up. They tell me when to eat. They tell me how much to eat. They tell me how fast to eat it. I got to ask them to go to the bathroom. I got to ask them. So either way, I'm structured, right? And I can't stand it. So I give up a little bit of my will, and I go to a recovery home. That's normal for me. It's 12-step based, because that's where I got the closest I've ever been to God. Is in a 12-step based program. That's how I live my life today, right? Like, I don't like it all the time. I don't want to be there, but I don't want to be in jail. I don't want to be on probation. I don't want to die. And there's the kicker. Like, I've stayed long enough to want to live. I haven't always wanted to live. As a matter of fact, I've done my best to die as many times as I could, and it just couldn't do it, right?
I'm reminded of a scripture that comes to mind when I'm listening to you. And I believe it's in the book of Proverbs. It says, a just man falleth 7 times and gets back up again. And sometimes we think that the success stories have to be those people that they go through one bout of probation and they're on the straight and narrow from here on out. Some people think that that looks like, well, I got shaken up in the county jail or I had that prison sentence. But you're a testimony of someone who's fallen, gotten up, fallen, and gotten up, and fallen, and continues to get up. For you all who are listening today, by way of tablet, by way of YouTube, by way of you're on the Death or Prison podcast website and you're listening to this testimony, God is saying that no matter how many times you fall, you can get back up. God is saying no matter how many times that you've fallen into that addiction, don't even think like, I'm never going to get over this. And I love something what you said, the person that has the 5-year testimony that can say, I've been off of drugs for 5 years, they started with a day.
Tara, we thank you so much for coming and sharing your testimony. I know that there's a lot of people out there that this will resonate with. There's a lot of people out there that are feeling what you've been through and feeling what you're feeling, or they've been through what you've been through. And those that haven't, there's a lot of people that have not been through what you've been through, but it could keep them from going that route. And your testimony is huge. One of the scriptures, we've overcome him, meaning the enemy, by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. So it's huge for you to come here today and tell us your testimony. So we thank you so very much for that.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
I've stepped out of some comfort zones, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And
God uses us that way.
Yes.
And I don't believe this is the last time that you're going to be before cameras or before a microphone or before people sharing your testimony. This is the Death or Prison podcast brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. You've been hearing a tremendous testimony from a young lady that has overcome a lot of odds and that is still on her journey. Tara, from all of us, your family, we thank you. We're going to be continuing to be right here as a family. We don't just, you think we just like have a podcast and we just close stuff up and we just leave. No, we exchange numbers. We pray. We do all of the things that a family would do off of the camera as much as we do it on the camera. And so that's available to you as well. This is the Death or Prison podcast brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. I'm Johnny Branham. You've been listening to the wonderful testimony of Miss Tara McCard and my lovely wife, Shantae Branham. This is the Death or Prison podcast, but we say
Choose life.